Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds, Edge to Edge Transformation. And speaking of transformation, we have Nitin Dahad with us here. Nitin is a multifaceted personality. He has done all kinds of things, including his current role as a journalist and an amazing writer. That's how I got to know him over the past 2 years. Nitin, tell us about your journey. You didn't start off as a journalist, did you?
No, no, not indeed. Hello, hi Shankar. Good to be on your show. It's fun. I've been watching what you've been doing, and I really enjoy your interviews. So yes, I actually started as electronic engineer, and that was back in 1985 at National Semiconductor in the UK in Bedford, and a lot of people will know the rivalry between Texas Instruments and National Semiconductor in Bedford in the UK. TI was on the hill, and National was in an office in the city centre. But yeah, so that was my initiation into the semiconductor industry, and it was quite an initiation because I was an intern. It was my year out from university, so I'd done 2 years studying electronic engineering, and I said, all this theory is not going to get me anywhere. What it entailed actually was quite interesting because if you remember way back then, you didn't have the web, online information, Google. So National used to have lots and lots of data books. My role was on the end of a phone, answering calls from engineers doing their work, building their design, building their projects, or having problems with their chips. So my job was to always take those calls, and I take sometimes 50 calls a day, where they say, my chip is my LM741 is not working. Can you help me? So then I go through the data sheet, go and emulate that in the lab, and do all that kind of stuff. So 1 year of that was a real initiation into the semiconductor industry. Every problem that any engineer would have with National's chips on that year, and I think that was quite a good sort of grounding for what I was going to do next. So I went back to uni, did my final year, and then that was actually quite interesting because then, as you know, the semiconductor industry, we have our classic 5-year up and down cycles. It was part of one of the down cycles, and although all my sort of colleagues got their jobs, I didn't get a job. So I spent most of the summer thinking, what do I do next? And this is the start of my sort of career as a chameleon in the semiconductor industry, changing my spots whenever I needed to do it. And so I saw an advert in the national newspaper here in England, the Guardian newspaper. One of the tiny little advert, it said, editor required recent electronics degree. I thought, that's me. The publisher, it was a small publisher, published 3 magazines, and one of them was a magazine called Silicon Design. That was my initiation into journalism. And I think my first week was a press conference at the Dorchester Hotel on the Tuesday, I think. And I had no clue how to produce a magazine. I had no clue how to do anything, but I learned very fast. And I produced my first monthly magazine, sort of obviously after I got there. So, it's always about learning on the job. I think I doubled the circulation of the magazine I think we were in print from 6,500 to 13,000. Journalism doesn't have much earning power, and most journalists who watch this will understand what I mean. So I quickly moved after a year into PR. I was writing about diesel engines and electrical relays. I think one of my clients was Télémécanique Électrique in France. It was writing about 1,500-word articles about relays. Saw a local ad in the newspaper where I live, and it said technical publicity editor required. It was a company called Marconi Instruments, which is a big test and measurement company. The role was basically writing all the publicity material for Marconi, and it was a large company all over the world, 3,000 employees, I think, and it was good fun. 6 years, I got to learn a lot, and I also became their PR manager. I've done various things from large corporate to startup, and what you learn in a large corporate is valuable. You get to learn a lot, and that learning helps you a lot in everything else. It's not just for that job. And I think if you take it that way, it's actually quite interesting then to sort of say, okay, how can I use this somewhere else? And so, yeah, 6 years at Marconi, I learned pretty much everything that I could learn in sort of marketing, communications, PR, crisis communications. I did courses on crisis communications because, again, that was through the period 1990 when we laid off a lot of people. So as a PR manager, you're going and talking to all the local press and the national press about the job losses and all those kinds of things. And there were acquisitions and things like that, and things we disposed of. So everything has, it's like Newton's law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So anything you do which you think might be positive has a negative reaction some way or another. And PRs have to manage that. And again, your friends at Intel know all about this. So I think even sort of in our industry we see a lot of that right now as well. And then that's quickly moved to me sort of going to a company called GEC Plessey Semiconductors in Swindon in the UK. And again, that was part of a global organization. That was the start of a job where I became more ambassadorial, as it were. So again, you change depending on what the role is. And what I was doing there was I was basically PR manager, but also marketing manager for the whole organization. We had offices in the US, in I think San Jose and Santa Cruz, I think, if I remember, in California, and then France and Germany. We did some PR, and then we had offices in Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, Japan. I used to basically travel to all our sites around the world as the ambassador, so telling the story, helping this British company with its story globally. Because one of the things I remember once when I was sitting in a bar in New York with our sales manager, the American sales manager at Plessey, and he was saying, the problem we have is getting our foot in the door. The role of PR and marketing for companies is to help them get that foot in the door, because otherwise, if you're an unknown or if you're not known in that territory, then it's very hard for the salespeople to get in. And I learned that later on with lots of other jobs as well. So it's so I was traveling around every quarter, East Coast, West Coast, US, France, Germany, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, Japan. And that was quite sort of every quarter, just doing that thing for 2 years. And that's where I learned a lot, although it was sort of hard work, but it was actually quite interesting to learn culturally how media work in different places around the world and what kind of things they look for. So if you go to do a press briefing in Taiwan, it was all about the spokesperson. I'd be quoted in all the newspapers in Taiwan. In the US, it's how are you going to help US jobs, US technology, US and it was all varied depending on location, but everybody was actually focused on what's it going to mean for our local territory. The thing that I did next was I sort of took a role in a PR agency in the UK just to be settled for a couple of years to be around for my family. I met a startup in a trade fair in London, and it was 1998, and this startup had just got maybe $1 million seed funding from Nintendo for doing a hardware accelerator for their Star Fox game. It was a company called Argonaut Risk Corps. For the IPO, we changed that to ARC International. From the time I joined to the IPO, so we raised, when I was part of this startup team, there was only like 18 or 19 people. We raised £140 million in London. So again, another startup 101 failure. We went to Sandhill Road in August 1998, a week of meetings with all the investors there. And we said, look, we took the laptop and we said, look, you can configure your own processor, you can do all this, and you can have your own custom processor. Just at the press of a button, you get all the RTL code and all that. And they said, so what? So we never really were successful in Sandhill Road in terms of raising money. So we went back to London and raised the money there. 3 times I've interviewed Naveen Chadha of Mayfield, and it's quite interesting how, like, there's so much that I learned from that experience, and he has to do that on a day-to-day basis, sort of talking to companies and trying to figure out what their real value is. And I think the key thing when companies go to raise money, it's about what's your value to the market, not necessarily what your technology is. And I think that's a key failing for a lot of tech companies. We raised a lot of money, and as a result of the first fundraise, we went on a press tour in the US, and Jim Turley was interested in coming and joining our journey. So he came on board after the Microprocessor Forum in May 1999, I think it was. And so he was part of our journey, and it was amazing working with him. So we actually had a whale of a time. I mean, doing a startup, getting it to a $1 billion valuation IPO, actually quite a hard work for everybody. I mean, the whole team. I know I worked 24-hour days. I'm sure everybody else did as well. It's just, from almost zero to IPO in 2 years. I was involved with Jim and Bob setting up the office in San Jose. So South San Jose, we rented the Residence Inn. And basically, in and out of there every other week. I was traveling there Monday to Friday for 2 years. So that's kind of how our life was as a startup. And I think we weren't the only ones doing it. Everybody else was doing it. So you'd meet everybody on the plane. It was kind of community, a Monday morning flight, 9 a.m. United or Virgin or whatever, land at 2:30 or 1:30 in San Francisco, to get the rental car, go off to, Scott's or Burke's or wherever it is for the first meeting. So, it was kind of real Wild West spirit then for British startups that I was part of that cohort of. So it's quite interesting. But no, after that, so 2000, we did the IPO. 2002, I left because it was kind of getting boring and I got the startup bug. I started playing golf for a little while, and one of the investors in ARC, he said, we have a NASDAQ listed company as one of our investees, and they're not very good on their marketing. Can you help them? Can you meet the CEO? So this was like a few weeks after I'd left ARC. And then I was just playing golf, and then I sort of met Roland Pudelko at Heathrow Airport. Roland Pudelko was the CEO of Dialog Semiconductor. So that was when I basically then started advising with their marketing strategy, for Dialog. Ended up doing that for 6 years. I started working with various other people, and we helped them quite a lot and do different things. So that was quite good. And then other investors came to me as well at that time. Some like Pete McGowan from Alta Berkeley, he came to me and said, I've got an investor. He was ex-ARM. So he basically said, we have this company called Frontier Silicon. Can you go and talk to them? So I talked to Anthony Settle, and Anthony, I think, started working with him, and then various other companies. So from 2002 to 2008, I ended up building up quite I would say, a successful sort of marketing consulting company. And that was quite fun. Also, it was working from home, but, going and traveling to clients and whatever. So that was from 2002. So I was working from home way before the pandemic. And we launched a few other media startups as well. By the way, in 2002, I also launched with some ex-ARC colleagues, The Chili, which was a magazine for tech entrepreneurs and investors. It was pre-TechCrunch, so it was giving guidance and advice to technology entrepreneurs in mostly in the semiconductor space. And we did a due diligence, we did market analyses. I went to Robin Saxby's home and interviewed him, did a profile on Robin, Q&A, did a few other CEOs like that. So, part of all of this is, working with good people and sort of having good sort of connections. And then 2008 or 9, I launched another couple of ventures, Technology Leaders TV, where we were interviewing CEOs and then putting those interviews online. But that was, I think, just before YouTube. So 2009, I think I was in India, Indian Semiconductor Association event, and I met somebody from UK government. And I told him what I'd done. We were just chatting. He said, when you go back, you should go and talk to my boss. So I talked to his boss, and I ended up advising British government for 5 years, so doing an UK tech ambassador type role for 5 years in traveling around the US, Brazil, Middle East, Africa, India, taking trade delegations, coaching them, finding connections, speaking at conferences. So it was actually again another learning experience in terms of how you take businesses globally, culture, everything, and understanding the way everybody does business. And the one thing I found quite interesting about Brazil, because I spent almost 5 years going backwards and forwards, is how similar they are to India. There's a lot of commonality between the culture, the behavior, and on all of that. But what that means also at that time, business was slow, so it was very difficult for UK businesses to get into the Brazilian market. But then, in some Middle East markets, it was very, very good. US obviously was the main place where most tech companies wanted to go. So I think, we used to do quite a lot in the US. So that was quite interesting. 2014, I finished that contract. And then I started mentoring with Seed Camp, with Mass Challenge. And I also started mentoring at London Business School on their entrepreneurship school, the summer entrepreneurship school. In 2017, ended up doing some freelancing for EE Times, and then they said, why don't you come on board? So that's kind of what I'm doing now. And I'm doing a lot of interesting things. I do cover EE Times, I cover embedded.com, and also, do audio podcasts with Embedded Age with Nitin, but also with EE Times Current. And I've started doing some video, and I'm also starting a new series with using video on EE Times. It'll be a kind of like a chat show. So I've already recorded a few, and that'll be coming up live.
Well, Nitin, what I find fascinating is that you didn't just stop at one particular thing. You could have been an engineer, you've been a journalist, you've done PR, you've been an ambassador, even as a diplomat at the national level, UK and internationally. First of all, how did you manage to do all these things well? Secondly, you have a keen interest in people, but which of these roles did you enjoy the most?
There's a John Wayne movie, I think, where I remember when I was a child, I used to watch John Wayne quite a lot in the Westerns. And he throws I don't know, it's a young person, whether it's his daughter or his nephew, niece, whatever, into the water because they're too scared. And it's kind of like that principle where you throw yourself into the deep end and just get on with it. When I started as a journalist, I had no clue how to create something, but then I said, okay, well, look, let's apply myself to it and let's figure out what I need to do. So I think it's about being adaptable, figuring out how to get something done. And I think if you look globally, there are mindsets and cultures, and in Europe, sometimes we don't have always that kind of mindset. There's kind of a corporate mindset nowadays. Britain was based on small business, historically, shop owners and all that, and small manufacturers. But I think in today's day and age, you need to have a little bit more of a sort of can-do attitude. One of the magazines I started with Richard Wallace, who's the ex-editor-in-chief of EE Times, we started something called the Next Silicon Valley. And I think, I've written a lot about, the Silicon Valley culture. And I would say there is that can-do attitude in Silicon Valley. And that's what a lot of governments were trying to emulate back in the late 2000s. Not just that, but the innovation ecosystem. And that's why we started the Next Silicon Valley magazine, to showcase a lot of that. But yes, it's just, how do you manage to do all of that? It's basically just having that can-do attitude, which people now call entrepreneurial, and figuring, having an inquisitive mind. When I worked at National Semiconductor, there was a field application engineer called Ben Mullet. And he was always saying, you ask too many questions, but he said, keep asking the questions, you'll go far. And I think it's about asking the questions. And this is back in 1985. So it's a long time ago, but I remember people, I remember names, I remember who's had influence on my career. And I think, Ben is probably one of those. I shouldn't because I've shouted him, I should also say Dave Brown, because he was my mentor and manager at National.
In fact, that's how you and I got to know each other. We were asking each other lots of questions on
Exactly.
LinkedIn, and then you found me at the Intel Foundry booth, and lo and
Exactly.
behold, we become pals.
Exactly.
What I find fascinating about you, Nitin, is that you have that, I mean, depth in technology, and you seem to have kept it up with all this PR, marketing, even what do you call diplomatic roles. You kept up your technology edge all the time. How did you do that?
I just follow. I mean, there are some good people out there writing good things. I mean, and so when I was not a journalist, yeah, I would follow the right people. So obviously, the leading magazines around the world, and yeah, obviously E Times amongst those. But in other sort of places, there are good magazines. So I'd follow them, but not at the same time. Sorry, at the same time, I would I I'm already plugged in to an alumni network of ex-colleagues who I would be catching up with, and so maybe in the early days of EE Times, that's kind of how it's easy to then write more stories about things going on, because I'd also be connected to people who knew what was going on. So I think that was helpful, but in terms of keeping up with what's going on, it's reading and not just reading the technology, but I had a fascination when I was young with a program in the UK. It's called Tomorrow's World, and they'd have like I think half an hour or 40-minute session of presenters presenting future technologies, and so I always had that fascination. And again, 1974, 75, I think there was Professor Carl Sagan. He did a Royal Institute Christmas lectures here in London. And I remember just listening to him. He was a real visionary. He was somebody who could inspire lots of youngsters, and I was inspired. So when you're inspired to be curious and about, that time it was astronomy, it was about science, and it's just so much then ingrained in your DNA to then keep up with everything and find the sources of information.
Since you did the next Silicon Valley program already in the past, where do you see the world going? Everything seems to be changing as we speak.
It's a melting pot right now of all these wonderful and fascinating technologies. We've got all this connectivity, we've got all this capability to process information. So do the capture through the sensors, do the analytics, and all the machine learning and all the I think where it's heading is we have to find optimal ways of doing that, because otherwise we'll just be using up the world's energy and just processing, and also getting so much data and information that we don't know what to do with it. I was having a very interesting conversation with a company that's providing predictive maintenance and basically through accelerometers and sensors on the rail network in Germany. And the CEO has a data analytics background, and we talked about how there is so much data. It's not about gathering the data; it's about what to do with that data and passing that data at the edge, so that we're not sort of transporting it all around and doing lots of stuff with it. And there was an interesting analogy that we actually made to the Indian medical system. And so many times I've had issues in the UK, and this is not a dig at the health systems or anything like that. It's just about volume of data. So, a specialist, a doctor in the country where I live, which is the UK, and maybe countries where there are not that many that much of a population, they take a long time to diagnose what might be wrong. And I go to India with the same problem, and I have had this experience 3 times, and they diagnose it within like minutes, and they know because they've got volume of data that's that's there, and they've sort of analyzed that data, and the specialists in their minds, and they know, okay, well, these set of things happen. That means this is this, and we need this treatment for this. So I think, if you sort of translate that to AI and big data, we really need to be able to sort out data, and I think it's a question of how we apply ourselves. And everybody talks about optimization of sort of the data analysis, so that not sending it all via a connection or to the cloud, or using up lots of storage. It really is about being very clever with the data, and I think that would be where it's all going.
You and I started working from home decades ago.
Yeah,
Where do you see the future of work going? Are people going to continue in being in offices? Where do you think it's changing? And what about jobs itself? Do you think
yeah.
there'll be these long-term corporate jobs? What's likely to happen with all these changes?
I would like to think there'll be a transformation in the way we work, but I don't know what that transformation will be. Um, if I use our examples, we found a very good model of both remote or work from home and working with clients face to face. So I think there might be an evolution of that. I don't know if that's the next thing, because we were doing it 20 years ago, 21 years ago, but is it that people are now, they've got different tools and more advanced tools now compared to 20 years ago? So will there be a different morphing of that how you work into some other hybrid working? And I don't know what that is, but there is something and to working with people, and I think humans are humans, and we have to maybe take it back to animal psychology and human psychology as well. And animals do work together. They work with each other. You look at ants in a colony. You look at herds of whatever animals. They work together somehow, and there is still a misalignment between what education is producing as curriculum and the graduates it's churning out for employability by industry. And I think that might be something that will have to change first before we know what's going to be next.
Technical entrepreneurs are obsessed with technology and
Yeah.
making the cool next widget or gadget. But the
Mm.
reality is that it has to work, it has to provide value. How
Yeah.
do you think an entrepreneur becomes a good entrepreneur with a customer focus? What can they do differently?
If an entrepreneur is good, is a technology founder or technology entrepreneur, he or she will always be focused on just making that technology better. And that's why, in my experience, I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen as well, that beyond a certain point, after a certain stage, you need somebody with commercial experience to come in to lead that business. And it may be that if you are technology minded and your co-founders, one of them has commercial experience, you've done it before, then you come together again, then there's potential for you to understand what that market value is. But if you're pushing just with that technology and not understanding the commercial value, you do need somebody either from outside or to bring in somebody within the team who has that commercial sort of capability. And I think that's where in Europe, I think we see a lot of people are very good at research, very good at technology development, and not necessarily always good at that selling. And I think that's where you need that sales. And I think even when we did the Chile and we did the next Silicon Valley, which were media firms, we were good at like creating the product, but we weren't very good at selling. So that's where you need external people to come in to help you sell. So again, with technology founders, technology entrepreneurs, it's not always easy to do both. keeping that technology roadmap going, and also raising money and sort of doing all the operations, and then just finding the value proposition to take to customers and partners.
Very true, very true. That's why it takes a whole village to make a company successful.
Yeah,
And one part of that is PR, and out there, the images we create, the brand that we create for a company. And you mentioned that there are many do's and don'ts,
yeah,
and often young companies get it wrong.
yeah.
How can they improve it? What are the do's and don'ts?
One thing I learned when I started with Silicon Design magazine, I worked with a journalist on the other magazine, which is Microsystem Design. I think it's quite good. Paul Marks. He said the one thing you should do, and this is in the news story, is get the who, what, where, why, when in the first paragraph. And if you're writing a press release or a news article or whatever, and I think that holds true for pretty much PRs as well. If you can't get the who, what, where, why, when in that first paragraph, you're not going to capture the journalist's attention. And also, if you just focus on a feature and not the benefit, then the talking to the journalist is the same as talking to the investor, where the investor will say, well, yeah, it's just a feature. What's the market opportunity? We don't know. So I think there is a very fundamental try and address the who, what, where, why, when of your announcement, your statement, your story, whatever it is. I mean, basically, I'm a storyteller, whether I'm on the journalist side or on the PR side. You have to tell the story both succinctly at the beginning, but then expand on those in the rest of the story.
Media has changed. When we entered the industry, it was almost exclusively print media. And there came a time when online media was all text based, that kind of Twitter era, everything was text or
Yeah.
short or long form. And now it's videos and maybe even 3D in future. In what ways has the focus changed, and has it changed the nature of journalism? Has it changed the nature of marketing PR?
Okay, there are lots of different threads there, but first of all, if you take the media, um, with I think the trade media, which basically has been serving the electronics industry, has been evolving, and we've seen that going from print to online, and then lots of different forms. And I have a lot of colleagues and peers who do video, audio, webinars, live events, moderating panels, and I do all of these as well. But yeah, there's still going to be a mix of online and offline still works quite a bit. So in terms of that media delivery, I think just getting the right mix, and then for a media business, just to find the right way of making that into a reasonable sort of business that can self-fund itself, or through advertising, sponsorships, or whatever it is. That's one thing. Reporters have diminished significantly because where EE Times, for example, had 20, 30 reporters, now there's only a handful. So I think people and have lots of peers in the industry. They do a lot of good work in terms of providing that analysis that you won't get from just financial sort of news feeds and things like that. And I think that's where maybe the value of reporters will be, because you will get on the news wires and everything else, you'll get all the news you want. At the end of the day, I think what people, when they read EE Times or any of our competitors, it's all about getting to understand what's behind that story, what's beyond that story. So that's where I think reporting will still stay in the trade press, definitely in the business press that we operate in. More broadly, I think you've got large corporates and actually creating their own channels, but at the end of the day, they're also looking for that independent analysis, and I think that's sometimes where reporting will still be valuable. There are companies and large companies in our industry where we have issues as global reporters and where they have one identity or set of news for a North American audience and another for Europe or rest of the world. And quite often, the one thing that bothers me is when they know I'm London-based and reporting for the US, they still try and say, okay, this is the UK story, but here's the US story. I said, well, look, I want the global story. I don't want a story for specific regions. So I think a lot of companies don't get that, and a lot of PR people still say, oh yeah, you're in London, so you only want London-based stories and things like that.
Wow, we are still hyper local in some ways. Speaking of hyper local, as you know, the whole geopolitics and the supply chain issues have come to the point where many nations, many regions have decided to create at least competencies in their area. And the United Kingdom has put in tremendous resources also, just like the US CHIPS Act, to change the face of semiconductors and other related industries. Where do you see that going? Do you think it's going to make things more and more local in different geographies?
Well, you've seen, I think, that even US companies now are lobbying for more collaboration internationally and with ecosystem partners. And I refer specifically to headlines here from Intel and I think that gets. I mean, we've been getting a lot of interest, and when you look at the traffic, a lot of people are reading that because they want to understand that whole supply chain story. So there is a lot of that. Let's make it more resilient. How do we make sure that we don't, if somebody turns a tap off somewhere, we still have alternate sources. If you think about, when I was working at National Semiconductor back in 1985, one of the things I remember is everybody used to ask about a second source, the chips, and where's the second source? Or, and if you look at the military, it was always about, sourcing second source components or whatever it is. And I think it's just hopefully going back to that. One of the things I find really interesting is maybe because when people have been optimizing their costs in many ways over the years, that second source thing has gone away because it's only one source for most things now. So it may be that it's just about making the world a more resilient place.
Yeah, and speaking of resilience, you had this magazine called The Next Silicon Valley, and now we have many more Silicon Valleys, not just the one in the San Francisco Bay Area. Do you see fundamental differences? First, how they're organized. Secondly, their growth, because not every Silicon Valley has panned out, right?
One of the things I would say is everybody has their own flavor. Everybody has their own degrees of success, but that success is measured not by using Silicon Valley as a yardstick, but it's using their own parameters. And I always say, the biggest and most successful Silicon Valley outside Silicon Valley is Israel and Tel Aviv and Haifa, all that ecosystem there. And that was maybe partly down to two things: Intel and their defense department. So I think that happened very successfully. And if you see a lot of the success out of Israel, and we've got plenty of companies, some acquired by Intel, some acquired by others, but plenty of companies coming out of there and doing a lot on the automotive side as well right now. So Israel has been a very good model for many. If you look at places everywhere, they have something which is a government program to create. First of all, they started creating spaces, so like a location, but then they realized that they need the talent pool, they need the funders, so they need the corporates. So they started doing it, trying to do a more inward investment into these clusters where there's education. So I think everybody's doing it to some degree, but I would still like to sort of pick out sort of some areas. Like, for example, I still think Bangalore is really. I was there in February 2023, and just for 2 days, and I see the buzz and the the activity, and they're all young community in terms of in the tech community. So I think there is definitely something going on there, and we've already seen from the old when TI and Qualcomm and all those were out there from the 80s, and how they spawned a lot of second and third generation spinouts. So I think there is that history already there in India, and then that sort of created a little satellites like in Pune with the automotive, and in Noida and Gurgaon. So I was speaking to Sanjay Gupta, ex NXP, last week, and he was telling me about all the things that they're doing in automotive. Obviously there's things going on in China, and if you look at the Silicon 100 that EE Times produces every year, I think China features very strongly. And look at the sort of companies that are coming out of there. There's obviously a very good ecosystem spawning that, and south of France, Grenoble and all that area, that's a very strong area for our area in terms of semiconductors. But then I've named a few, but then there's plenty of others, and it'd be a disservice to all the others. But it's just what I'm saying is these are examples. When I talked to Synaptics CEO in the Bay Area, was it last year or the year before? And he was saying, we acquired this RF company in the south of France, just because they had all they needed that RF expertise, and it's all there. So a lot of the big corporates in the US and in Europe are snapping up all of these talent pools in these little Silicon Valleys around the world. So I think that's quite interesting. I mean, EDA and Warsaw, for example, Poland has been very strong as well. So with Synopsys being out there and all that.
I've worked with companies in Israel, sitting here in the San Francisco Bay Area, worked for what used to be an Israeli company. I worked with teams in Armenia, in Russia, India. Yes, it is amazing how much the world has gone into the technology arena. And you said something very interesting earlier, which is crisis communication. And this is the first time I've heard about it. What is crisis communication, and how does it apply in the tech space?
Okay, so for me, when I was part of a corporate organization, and I think again, I use Intel as an example because that's where you've worked, or Synopsys, but they will have some journalist or somebody or some news has leaked out that is detrimental to your company, your shareholders, your stakeholders, or your share price, whatever it is. So you need to deal with that. So crisis communications is basically having a communication strategy to deal with that. So the way I learned it in the 80s was with when the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and how they handled that. So that is a very good case study that people use when you go on a crisis communications course, to see how you handle a crisis like that in terms of managing your reputation, your image, your stakeholders' perceptions of you, whether it's customers, partners, investors, shareholders. So it's about managing that communication and setting expectations and making sure that they understand that you're on top of it. And I think that's where it is. So, for example, when I was at Marconi, it was all about job losses. So, it was all about handling all the newspaper reporters that said, "Oh, you're cutting jobs. You're in trouble." And so you have to get rid of that message that you're in trouble. It's not you're in trouble. And I think people have got smart over it. They don't call it crisis communications anymore. Because like if you see corporate spin doctors, they talk about optimizing their their costs or whatever it is now. So people are good at it now. They don't call it crisis communications, but there are going to be things which are going to hurt your brand, your reputation. And think about, for example, cybersecurity. When you have a big cyber attack or hack, you've got to manage all your customers because they're like all the data that's gone and all the knock-on effects. Something, power stations have come down or whatever it is. One of my favorite movies is Die Hard 4, where you just see like everything being controlled and everything can be switched on and off by a bad actor. So, it's then the crisis communications team within that organization that is responsible for it comes into play.
What career advice do you have, either for people starting in the industry or starting in school or changing midway somewhere, how they should go about changing? And you've done that many times.
I think I will draw from the National Center for Universities and Business report that we did. And I think one of the big things that industry was saying was lack of communication skills. There is going to be some, for a lot of people, they might be good at what they do, but what industry wants is those communication skills, those collaboration skills. One of the smartest things I did in my university was I took a course in creative and technical writing. So we had to do finance courses, but we also had to do something non-engineering and non-finance. So I chose creative and technical writing. And so that was what landed me my first job as a journalist, because I was showed in my writing. So, have those communication skills, or try and figure out how to have those communication skills. But the other thing, I guess, which is not part of my skill set, but, play about, tinker. There's so much that you can do now with, things like Arduino, Raspberry Pi, and all these, play about with stuff, create stuff. It's a really magnificent time to be, it's a fantastic time to be making things and doing things and then using those. When I was 14 or 15, a school science project, I created a lie detector. And my basically the premise for that was, well, when somebody tells a lie, their moisture level goes up. So I think I created a moisture detector and it packaged it up. And then at school, in class, like everybody would say, oh, yeah, let's try it on him. Let's see if he's telling a lie. That's what it is. And it's good fun. It's all about, just getting that, playing around and doing that and being able to then understand the impact of what you've just created.
Yeah, tinkering, hacking, learning how to express. These things will never go away, no matter which particular domain we work in.
Exactly.
Which reminds me, one of the interesting things I found about you was your weekend post about the Nitin Rap that was used in college days. Can you sing the song or tell us the history of how it all happened?
No, it's on my LinkedIn, and you can go to the link there. But the history is, so I started my electronic engineering degree at City University in 1982. So in every year, the Students' Union, which is basically looking after the interests of the students. So the Students' Union elects a president to look after the interests of the students of that university. And there was quite a bit of apathy. So people weren't voting and getting interested in student welfare. So somebody came to me and like a couple of people from the previous Students' Union, and they said, Nitin, just do as much as you can to hype it all up. So this is where I learned storytelling and marketing. I was actually put up as a candidate. I wasn't a serious candidate. I created a series of 10 posters, very simple images. And one of them was, like Nitin for spelling his name backwards, and because it's a palindrome. And then also I was sitting with my lab partner, Julian Penworthy, in one evening in his room, and there was a band called Relevant POS, and they've been doing music for I think a few years before that. And so they were his friends, and he was a musician as well. So they said, "Oh, let's create a rap." So they created the Nitin Rap, And they also created a Nitin jingle, and it said Nitin for president. It was just like Nitin for president. So, and then there was the Nitin Rap, and you can listen to that. I posted it via LinkedIn. But so that we basically kept me anonymous, but created a lot of hype. So there were the posters, there was the jingle, there was the rap, and there were live events where people would be encouraged to come and listen to each of the candidates' views and what they were going to do. But mine was a cardboard cutout, and they'd play my rap and say, just vote for him, and they'd have all the posters. So I almost won. It was fun.
The power of the media, isn't it? You worked in so many different things, Nitin. If there's any one period of your career or any particular thing you did the most that you enjoyed the most, what would that be?
I would say there's two things. One was very, very unequivocally the ARC journey. Building something from almost nothing and making it a successful company, which eventually Synopsys bought. And I think that 2-year period of working 24 hours a day every other week, Monday to Friday, California to Silicon Valley, that was just a defining period of my sort of my career. The second one would be working as that advisor to British government and just learning culturally how everybody does business, but also how to help and mentor businesses that were going out to all of these markets. So those are the two, I think, things that I would say, I enjoyed the most, but also probably worked hardest at. But also, I mean, I worked hard at everything, but what I mean is, was most successful at, I guess.
It's been a joy, Nitin, talking to you about everything under the sun. And it is almost as much fun here talking to you as it was walking with you and your family in Carmel by the Sea and going around Point Lobos and things like that.
That was fun.
So thanks again. And to everybody out there, I'm always looking for different viewpoints. It's not all about just creating technology. It's also the storytelling. It's also looking at what's necessary and useful to the world. And please come forward and let us know your stories. And it's not all about the US. There's technology happening everywhere. I have personally worked for Israeli companies, for companies incubated in India, and in even technology incubated in Armenia. So we want to hear your stories. Thanks again, Nitin. It's a joy
Thank you,
talking to
Shankar.
you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.